Happy Mother's Day. To help celebrate Mother's Day today, we've got a little video for you that Lisa Unger and Ariel Bowers put together. They encouraged a bunch of the kids from our church to make cards for their mothers, take a picture, and send a picture of that card in. So let's sit back for a moment and enjoy Mother's Day. I hope you enjoyed that video. Now, kids, if you've been maybe unable to go out and buy your mom a gift because, all of the restrictions that are in place, you couldn't go shopping, I've got an idea for you. Often moms say all they want for Mother's Day is just family time together. And you know what? I think some of them have had enough family time together that they need some social distancing. So maybe you could practice your social distancing by leaving mom alone in the house for a while today, or let her practice some social isolation in the backyard all by herself. Now, another creative idea is to think about a nugget of wisdom that your mom has given you. Maybe put it on a card and send it electronically to her. Now, here's a few samples. If at first you don't succeed, try doing it the way Mom told you to in the first place. If you're old enough to criticize what I put in your lunch, you're old enough to make it yourself. Now, some parental advice also goes a long way. Here's one. There's no way to be a perfect parent, but a million ways to be a good one. Being a single mother is twice the work, twice the stress, and twice the tears, but also twice the hugs, twice the love, and twice the pride. If you haven't yelled at your kids lately, you're probably not spending enough time with them. And what my mother told me, read your Bible and pray every day, especially if you want to grow in your relationship with God. In Proverbs 31, King Lemuel shares some wise advice that he received from his mother. Indeed, he calls it an oracle, an inspired utterance, a prophetic word. Now, not everything us parents say is an inspired oracle, a prophetic word. But in this case, Lemuel clearly understood and embraced what his mother said as divine wisdom, that his mother wanted to see instilled in the life of her son. Let's read Proverbs 31, verses 1 to 9. The sayings of King Lemuel, an inspired utterance his mother taught him. Listen, my son. Listen, son of my womb. Listen, my son, the answer to my prayers. Do not spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings. It is not for kings, Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, not for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Let beer be for those who are perishing, wine for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. defend the rights of the poor and needy. This inspired utterance is wise advice for a great life. And it's noteworthy for at least two reasons. In the first place, its source appears to be non-Israelite in origin, foreign. For example, there's no mention of any King Lemuel anywhere in Israel's records. And many of the words in these 9 verses are Aramaic, the international language of the time, rather than in Hebrew. Yet the wisdom that she passed on to her son is embraced by all Israel as God's truth and worthy of being included in the sacred scriptures. Now, some people are troubled by this inclusion of foreign material because they refuse to listen to anyone or anything that is not within the narrow boundaries of their preferred sources. You know, you've got to listen to this preacher or to this author or to this particular news source. But the Bible as a whole, and the book of Proverbs in particular, includes quotations, parables, and proverbs that echo God's truth revealed through his prophets. They knew that all truth is God's truth. The laws, commands, and instructions God revealed to Moses, called the Torah, became the official standard by which all truth claims were to be measured. You read about that in Deuteronomy 13. Lemuel and his mother may have been foreigners who converted to Israel's faith, especially given the point made in verse 30 of this chapter. A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. But other proverbs from foreign sources that were in sync with the Torah were also included. Together, they were set on the foundation of true wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That is, a reverence and honor for him. It's like the ABCs of the alphabet. It's like these are foundational to the way of godly living. A second notable item is that the source of this inspired utterance is not only foreign, it's also female. It's from the mother of a king. This makes it one of a kind document, since, as Professor Roland Murphy points out, elsewhere in the ancient Near East, there is no example of an instruction given by the mother of a king. But in Israel, fathers and mothers were both responsible to teach their children about God and his ways. Proverbs 1 verse 8 says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." That is why the book of Proverbs begins with the king teaching his son the ways of God, and it concludes with the royal son being taught the ways of God by his mother. Indeed, the parental source of this wisdom is underlined and it's intensified in verse 2. You see, she made sure that her son understood the significance and weight of her words so that he would give them his undivided attention. Some translations in verse 2 begin with a threefold "what" or "what are you doing, my son?" which is possible, but it's more likely that it's a literary device used to grab his attention. In other words, listen. Take this to heart, my son, son of my womb, son who was the answer to my prayers. Now, this threefold repetition of "my son" underlines not only the intensity of her words, but also the particularly intimate relationship she has with the one whom she carried within her womb and for whom she prayed. Now, given the depth of her relationship and role in his life, he should give what she is saying great weight, great value and authority. And parental authority, yes. But given that her child is also the answer to her prayers, she is pointing to an even higher source of authority than herself. My child, she is saying, you are a gift from God, and not just the result of human initiatives and actions. Her prayers may well have included vows, as some translations indicate, suggesting that she dedicated him to God even before his birth. like Hannah did in 1 Samuel chapter 1. We read there, "I prayed for this child, and the Lord has given me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." Parents, I think it's important that we tell our children that they are a gift from God. Maybe a story of their birth or how we prayed for them, how we dedicated them to the Lord early on. You know, one of the final gifts that my mother gave to me on her deathbed was a story in which she told me about how my being a pastor was the answer to her prayers. She told me when I was a teenager, she had seen how I had taken a keen interest in the Bible. And she wondered, "God, are you calling him into pastoral ministry?" But she thought, you know what? I don't want to put any pressure on him. So I'm going to pray for him. And she said, and I saw that and I thought, if he just keeps reading his Bible and praying, Lord, I know you're going to guide him. Wow, that was a powerful gift. Well, in verses 3 and 9, this mother to the king gives 3 nuggets of wisdom. The nugget of wisdom in verse 3. "Do not spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings." We need to keep in mind that Proverbs are condensed speech, concentrated wisdom. So we kind of need to unpack the meaning and implications about this warning about women. I mean, first of all, given the larger context of this chapter, she is telling him to be aware of women for sure, but not all of them. After all, in verses 10 to 31, she spells out in very memorable fashion the kind of woman he should seek out for a life partner. And verses 10 to 31 are memorable because in the original Hebrew language, they are written as an acrostic. Now, an acrostic means the first verse starts with the first letter of the alphabet, the second verse with the second letter of the alphabet, and all the way through the whole alphabet. Now, the poem is also memorable because it is the language that's used to introduce a wife of noble character. It's language that's usually reserved for people of great valor, heroes, military heroes, and other heroes in life. And so that's the kind of woman, a heroic one that he is to pursue. Finding a woman who fears the Lord, one who will be a blessing not only to her husband and to her whole household, but also a blessing to the whole community. In verse 20, he will say, she is to be one who opens her hands to the poor and extends her arms to the needy. A wife like that is what she envisions for her son. But she knows there are dangers in the road, that potholes and ditches that he needs to be very aware of if he's going to avoid them. Sexual desire, for example, is a very good gift from God. But if her son is going to avoid becoming one of those in the long list of kings who have been destroyed by their lack of sexual self-discipline, and King Solomon, the wise one, would head the list, then he will need to master his sexual desires and not allow himself to be mastered by them. To do this, he will need to avoid sexual obsessions. Various commentators kind of unpack this a little bit. Here is about the dangers of loose women. It's a warning against the intrigues that are often associated with a harem. It's a concern over the distractions of harems, over having many wives. And it's basically a caution against unrestrained sexual gratification. All of these were real dangers then, and our sexually obsessed culture today continues to find new ways to market sex and sex appeal to the masses. I mean, just look, for example, at the amount of time and energy and money spent on sex appeal. the beauty industry, vast amounts of time and money. And also in culture, there's this mixed message. The message is that sex is such a big deal that you just can't live without it. And then the other message, oh, sex is no big deal, so you should have sex with whoever you want and whenever. Psychology Today reported that during the coronavirus pandemic, it's been affecting the amount and type of porn that is being produced and the amount of people consuming it. Some studies were showing a 10 to 12% increase in porn searches. You see, marketers are finding new ways to entice people to their industry and their websites. Friends, the way sex is marketed may change over time, but the need to practice self-discipline, that never goes out of date. This includes practicing self-discipline in the area of alcohol consumption, as we see in verses 4 to 7. Oh, and by the way, the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction recently issued a report on the rise of alcohol consumption as well during the COVID pandemic. Apparently in BC, there's been a 40% increase in liquor sales. So I think what Lemuel's mother has to say is very current and apropos for our time. Now, yes, though she does not counsel complete abstinence, she does issue a very strong warning. I mean, it is not for kings, Lemuel. It is not for kings. It is not for rulers. 3 times increasing in intensity. She is keenly aware of the misuse and abuse of all alcoholic beverages, not just wine and beer. I mean, the Hebrew words translated wine, yayin, and beer, sakar, are often paired as a way of including all alcoholic beverages. Now, her strong caution is reflected in the Bible elsewhere. Of the approximately 60 references that we have to alcoholic drinks in the Bible, only 5 of them refer to something acceptable and good. You know, researchers tell us that wine was the most intoxicating drink known in ancient times. By modern standards, all the wine and beer was light, meaning it was in the 7 to 10% maximum percent alcohol range. And we know this because concentrated alcohol was only started in the Middle Ages when the Arabs invented distillation. In fact, I discovered that the word alcohol is an Arabic word. So, what is now called liquor or strong drink, including fortified wines, were unknown in biblical times. I mention this because having increased the potency and availability of alcohol in our day has just increased the odds of misusing and abusing it. After all, the strongest warnings about drinking in ancient times were directed primarily to kings and to wealthy people. Now, why is that? Because they were virtually the only ones that had access to the kind of quantities needed to drink to excess, to get inebriated. Today, almost everybody can do it. And, indeed, they often do. Now, an array of alcohol's intoxicating effects are spelled out in Proverbs 23. Notice, for example, woe, sorrow, strife, complaints, needless bruises, bloodshot eyes, strange sights. But in chapter 31, Lemuel's mother highlights impaired judgment. That's highlighted because good judgment is such a key part of being a good leader. In his role as a leader and as king and judge, his people cannot afford for him to be impaired. And you know what? Neither can the people that we work with, nor our families. Neither can they bear the costs of us being impaired either. A report by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, they attempted to quantify the costs to healthcare, the criminal justice, and lost productivity due to substance use in Canada, the social costs. Well, alcohol and tobacco together accounted for 70% of the estimated costs. Opioids, which often get a lot of press, were a distant third. And according to Statistics Canada, governments all across Canada, all put together, took in about $10.5 billion in revenue and taxes from the sale of alcohol. But that was $4 billion less than what it cost, the costs associated with alcohol in our society in the same year. So you, my son, Lemuel's mother is saying, should have no reason to drink to excess, though people in dire straits may have reason to do so. Now, some people have read those verses 6 to 7, as commending, some kind of free alcohol distribution program. One commentator put it this way: instead of storing wine in his cellars, the king should offer it as comfort to those who are hurting. But such a reading is completely out of harmony with the message of Proverbs as a whole. In chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler, and whoever is led astray by them is not wise." Drowning one's sorrows in a bottle solves nothing. It only deepens a person's inability to face and address their problems. So the wisdom of this book as a whole encourages us to read these verses as sarcasm. Lemuel, don't think and act like you're on Skid Row. Now, it's clear in the verses that follow, verses 8 and 9, that she wants him to be a positive force for good, especially to the poor. Son, help deliver the poor from their miserable poverty. Defend the weak and the vulnerable. Don't give them reasons for giving up hope and becoming drunkards. Now, the duties of the king were actually underlined in Psalm 72. I was reading that recently and thinking, wow, this is a king's job description. And it is. In fact, it's a coronation hymn and prayer for the king. It is well worth reading. Now, when we read that, it tells us that a central role of the king was to provide for the well-being of his people, like a good shepherd cares for his sheep. God's will was for the king to use his position and power to uphold justice for all people, especially the weak and the helpless and vulnerable. This was to include making and upholding fair and just laws. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Well, that is, do that for those whose voice carries no weight, who could easily just tune them out. Or for those who would be too intimidated to speak up because they've been bullied into silence. Use the power and position that you've been given, not just for your own well-being, but for those who desperately need it, for victims of abuse, for the elderly, for the disabled, for the poor who don't have access to reasonable credit other than loan sharks. Help these people out. A good leader also must be accessible to the people and champion the cause of those who otherwise would not get a fair hearing. Friends, this applies to us too, right? It tells us how each of us, should use the power and position that we have, whether it be in our homes, maybe in our places of work, in school, in sport, wherever it is. Do people have equal opportunity and access to the internet to study during this time? Many don't. It's important that we use the abilities and gifts we have personally and corporately for the well-being of all. As someone has said, we are all in this storm, but we're not all in the same boat. If your lifeboat is bigger and better and more well-stocked than most, because you have more time or money or education or spiritual wisdom, then put it to good use for others. Rather than living like, I'm on a cruise ship, and others are just out there trying to stay afloat. That's not the way it should be. And Lemuel's mother wanted so much more for her son as a king, as to be one who is a good king for all. Well, I want to conclude with two recent stories that I came across. Examples in which I found myself saying, thank God for a great mom. Now, the first one. Recently I was watching the first episode of The Last Dance, a documentary on the life of Michael Jordan. And in that episode, he was asked what it was like as a rookie in the NBA, especially given the drug culture in the league at the time. And Michael shared a story of how his team, the Bulls, were staying in a hotel during a preseason game. He decided to go knock door to door looking for his teammates, but there was no one was answering the door. And then he came to one door, and he heard a person behind the door whisper, "Shh, someone's outside." And then he heard this deep voice, "Who is it?" "It's MJ," he answers. "Oh, he's just a rookie. Let him in." So they open the door and he walks in and he sees practically the whole team. And they're doing things, Jordan says, I've never seen in my life. Cocaine, weed smokers, women. And what does he do? He says, "Look, man, I'm out." And from that point on, Michael said, I was more or less on my own. Why did Michael respond like that? Well, because of what his university coach had observed about Michael in his rookie year at college, at university. Michael's parents, the coach said, did a tremendous job with him. He's a fine young man, very conscientious. His parents did a tremendous job with him. Thank God for great parents, right? And it's not only kings and superstars who need great parents. All kids do. Which is why my second story is closer to home. This last week I was working in the office at church with my door open, and suddenly I see Rick Lehman come in, marching in with his mother Rosella, laughing as she comes in behind him. And she was laughing because she wasn't planning on stopping by. She was driving by the church. But when her son Rick saw it, he said, "Church!" And he made her stop so that he could at least come in for a few minutes. And I thought, thank God for a great mother who trains her child and her children up in the way that they should go, so that when they get older, they do not want to depart from it. Let's pray. Lord, today we thank you for the wisdom of your word and the mother and the mothers who have taught and modeled for us wisdom from you. May the seeds of the wisdom that we have heard today take root deep within our hearts. May they grow in us the kinds of attitudes and actions that are reflective of you. And may we as your children live like sons and daughters of the King, for your glory and for the good of our families and our communities and your world. Amen. Hello, just want to give you a few announcements. Last weekend, I was busy meeting with 175 other people from around our province for our annual provincial denominational convention. But instead of meeting in Abbotsford in person, we met from our computers. And we heard reports from our moderator, conference minister, people leading the camps, seminaries, college, our global mission agency. A lot of great reports. I'm going to be giving a few highlights, posting those on the website during the week, and just wanted to let you know that. Keep your eye out for that. Also, our local Pregnancy Concern Center is holding their annual Operation baby bottle fundraiser from Mother's Day to Father's Day. Now, I know normally we pick up a bottle on Mother's Day, fill it with money, bring it back on Father's Day, and instead this year we are encouraging you to make donations directly to Pregnancy Concerns online. There's information on our website, as well as an update from Director Joy Gove. And yes, it's on our website. Just check that out. Also, on behalf of the staff, worship leaders, worship team, I just want to say a big thank you for all of your encouraging notes and emails and phone calls. We really appreciate you as a congregation, and we pray for you, and we also wish you God's blessing.